is your land. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. Commemorations are being held across the country this year to mark the 100th anniversary of the birth of one of the country's greatest songwriters, Woody Guthrie. Born on July 14, 1912, in Okemah, Oklahoma, Guthrie wrote hundreds of folk songs, including This Land Is Your Land, Pastures of Plenty, Pretty Boy Floyd, Do Re Mi, and this song, The Ranger's Command.
But the rustlers broke on us in the dead hours of night. She rose from her blanket, a battle to fight. She rose from her blanket with a gun in each hand, said, "Come all of you cowboys, fight for your land."
A rare 1945 video recording of Woody Guthrie, known as the Dust Bowl Troubadour. Guthrie became a major influence on countless musicians, including Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen, Pete Seeger, and Phil Ochs. While Woody Guthrie is best remembered as a musician, he also had a deeply political side. At the height of the McCarthy era, Guthrie spoke out for labor and civil rights and against fascism. He died in 1967 after a long battle with Huntington's disease. But his music lives on.
Over this next hour, we speak with Woody Guthrie's daughter and granddaughter, and we'll be joined in studio by the Grammy Award-winning musician Steve Earle. But first, Woody Guthrie, in his own words, being interviewed by the musicologist Alan Lomax.
What did your family do? What kind of people were they, and where'd they come from?
Well, they come in there from Texas in the early day. My dad got to Oklahoma right after statehood. He was the first clerk of the county court in Okemah, Oklahoma, after statehood. Because he is known as one of them old hard-hitting, fist-fighting Democrats, you know, that run for office down there, and they used to miscount the votes all the time. So every time my dad went to town, it's common, the first question I ask him when he come riding in on a horse that evening, I'd say, "Well, how many fights do you have today?" And then he'd take me up on his knee and he'd proceed to tell me who he is fighting and why and all about it. Put it there, boy, we'll show these fascists what a couple of hillbillies can do.
Where did you live, on a farm?
Well, no, I was born there in that little town. My dad built a 6-room house, cost him about $7,000 or $8,000, and the day after he got the house built, it burned down.
What kind of a place was Okemah? How big was it? When you remember it, when you were a kid?
Well, in them days, his little town about 1,500, and then 2,000. A few years later, it got up to about 5,000. They struck some pretty rich oil pools all around there at Garrison City and Slick City and Cromwell and Seminole and Bowlegs and Sand Springs and Spring Hill and all up and down the whole country there. They got oil, got some pretty nice oil fields around Okemah there.
Did any of the oil come in your family?
No, we got the grease.
Woody Guthrie being interviewed by the musicologist Alan Lomax. Well, as we mark Woody Guthrie's centennial, his birthday is this Saturday. We're joined here in our New York studio by 3 very special guests. Nora Guthrie is Woody Guthrie's daughter. She's president of both the Woody Guthrie Foundation and Archives and Woody Guthrie Publication. She's also author of the brand new book, My Name is New York, Ramblin' Around Woody Guthrie's Town. It's published by Powerhouse Books. And we're joined by Anna Canoni. She's Woody Guthrie's granddaughter. And Steve Earle is with us, the musician, actor, author, activist, 3-time Grammy Award winner, performing here in New York at Woody Fest, a 3-day concert in celebration of Woody Guthrie's birthday at the City Winery. His recent novel and album share the same name, I'll Never Get Out of This World Alive. We welcome you all to Democracy Now! Nora, you're the daughter. Tell us about Woody's early years and the significance of your father, Woody Guthrie.
Well, he grew up in Oklahoma, in a little small town in Okemah, in 1912, and he actually came from a relatively middle-class family. They were in the real spirit of kind of what we'd call entrepreneurs now. His dad was kind of raring to go and make a success of himself, and his mother was of Scotch-Irish descent. And it's really from his mom that he learned how to write ballads. She sang all the long ballads from the old country to him, and spent a couple of years there. Their life quickly began to fall apart. The house burnt down, they lost all their money, illness and fires kind of followed him around. He lost his sister in a fire, etc. By the time he was about 14, he was kind of on his own, living in a gang house with a bunch of other kids on their own. And that's when really he began to kind of, I want to say, become conscious of the world around him and all the troubles he was seeing. And he moved up to Pampa, Texas, after a couple of years of living with the kids in the gang house, right at the time when the Great Dust Bowls were at their worst. And he was living in Pampa when the Great Dust Storm of 1935 took place. And again, I bring these up only because they're wake-up calls. And sometimes it seems that as human beings, we need these kind of catastrophic wake-up calls to realize and to begin asking who we are, why we're alive, and what we can do about it. And that was the beginning of his journey. He migrated to California with a couple of 100,000 other people, the largest migration in the history of the United States. And what he discovered when he left his small circle of life in Oklahoma and Texas was that the world was not what he thought it was. And when they tried to cross over to the California border for jobs, they were all stopped by state troopers and vigilante groups who didn't want the influx of all of these people who had lost their farms where they had lived for generations. So again, it was like one step after the next, a series of wake-up calls.
Well, I want to turn to an excerpt of an interview with Woody Guthrie in 1949 at the Newark, New Jersey YMCA. In this clip, he describes making early childhood political speeches.
At the time that I was born, the year 1912, my father was a sort of a hard, fist-fighting Woodrow Wilson Democrat. So Woodrow Wilson was nominated that same year. And at the age of about 4 or 5 years old, a long time before I went to school, I remember my dad used to teach me little political speeches and rhymes, and I'd climb up in a hay wagon around at all the political meetings and rallies they had on the streets, and I'd make my little speeches. And it might be that I've turned out now that where I don't believe the speeches anymore and make speeches just the opposite.
When did he first begin singing and songwriting?
He started early on, actually, in Pampa, Texas. He had his first little band, the Corncob Trio, and then later the Pampa Junior Chamber of Commerce Band. But in those days, he was mostly influenced by the music he had heard on the radio, actually. And I have to giggle because he did what every 19-year-old kid does. He forms a band to get a girlfriend. And that was just the impetus behind the whole thing. The early songs that he was writing were kind of dance band music. He played for socials, church socials, you know, local happenings, for the fun of it, actually. And it didn't occur to him that music could be expanded from then, from that perspective, until he got to Los Angeles.
And what happened in Los Angeles?
He was introduced to the labor movement, actually, to the political movement, which was pretty active in Los Angeles at that time in the late 30s. Now, I have to go back all along the way. He had already played with the idea of songwriting, like I said, but more kind of silly songs about that any 17 or 18-year-old would do. But as he was traveling along, particularly when he had these issues at the border trying to go into California and a couple of other things, the vigilante groups that he ran into that were trying to keep the Okies and Arkies out of the state of California, a couple of other incidents inspired him to start writing a couple of verses on his own. But again, he's only 20-something years old, pretty young kid. So he's writing in a notebook. He keeps track of things, the stories of the vigilantes, the stories of crossing the border, and songs like California's a Garden of Eden, a paradise to live in or see, but believe it or not, you won't find it so hot if you ain't got that do-re-mi. Vigilante Man, things like that, Pretty Boy Floyd. So he brings some of these verses and tunes to California when he gets his first radio show.
Steve Earle, I'm wondering if you could talk about the significance of Woody Guthrie in your life.
Well, it kind of invented my job. I found out about Woody Guthrie the same way a lot of people my age did, through Bob Dylan. And, I'm 57, so my first Bob Dylan records were actually relatively late ones, and I backtracked through, I had a drama teacher in high school that gave me a copy of The Free Will and Bob Dylan, the second Dylan record. So that was the first time I ever heard I'd heard Woody Guthrie by that time, and I'd heard, the Bob Dylan records I knew, the ones that I bought as they came out. But that was the first time I made the connection between just how much in the early going, Bob Dylan was Woody Guthrie, and how important Woody had been to Bob. I understood that connection when I've heard those early records for the first time. So, it's 1969, I'm 14 years old, the Vietnam War is going on. I'm not a candidate for a student deferment. As I got older, my friends started getting drafted, and I started out playing in coffee houses because I wasn't old enough to play in places that served liquor, and the one coffee house in San Antonio, Texas was a pretty politicized environment. So I heard of, these people quoted Woody Guthrie chapter and verse. The local underground newspaper was published upstairs. So I never separated music and politics, which kept bringing me back to Woody over and over and over again over, writing songs. And I finally went to Nashville when I was 19, and I was trying to make a living playing music. I still don't consider myself to be a political artist. I'm just an artist that I think, like Woody was, that lives in really politically charged times. When I started playing, the war was going on, and now I think these songs become, I think, more relevant every second of the times that we're living in right now.
Steve, I was there last night at the City Winery when you played Woody's song, Deportees.
Right.
I was wondering if you could do our break live by playing that song.
This song's like, I don't know, this song's, it becomes more important to me all the time just because I come from occupied Mexico, so it's, crops are all in, peaches are ripening, oranges all packed in their creosote lungs. They're flying us back to the Mexican border, take our money way back again. Goodbye to my farewell, Rosalee. Adios, mis amigos, Jesus y Maria. You won't have a name when you ride the big airplane. All they call you will be deportee. Now my father's own father, he waded that river. They took all the money that he made in his life. My brothers and sisters worked in the fruit trees. They rode the trucks till they took down and died. Goodbye to my mom, farewell, Rosalee. Adios, mis amigos, Jesus y Maria. You won't have a name when you ride the big airplane. All they call you will be deportee. Plane called fire over Los Gatos Canyon. fireball of lightning shook all our hills. Who are these friends scattered like dry leaves? The radio says they were just deportees. Is this the best way we can grow our big orchards? Is this the best way we can grow our good fruit? Drifting like dry leaves right on the topsoil, be known by no name except deportee. Goodbye to Mohan, farewell Rosalee. Adios, mis amigos, Jesus y Maria. You won't have a name when you ride the big airplane. All they call you will be deportee.
Wow, what a break. Here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Steve Earle live in our studio, the three-time Grammy Award-winning artist, Guthrie-inspired musician. As well, we're joined by Woody Guthrie's daughter, Nora Guthrie, who runs the Woody Guthrie Archives, and Anna Canoni, who is his granddaughter, who works at the archives as well. When you listen to deportees about this crash, Anna, in, when was it, 1948, near Los Gatos Canyon, 20 miles west of Coalinga in Fresno County, where the people being deported were killed. Your thoughts about your grandfather?
Well, I play that song for my kids. I sing it. I don't play, but I sing it for my kids every night as they go to sleep, which is an interesting way to put your children to sleep, I would like to say. There's children's songs that Woody does, but I put my kids to sleep to Deportee, My Peace, some of the other materials, but I'm constantly learning about Woody. I feel like he's still evolving because we're still learning more and more about him. So I was raised knowing who my grandfather was in terms of being a songwriter. Back then, in the early 80s in Howard Beach, Queens, not a lot of my friends knew. So it's not like he was a superstar. It was more that he had something to say that was very important, and I was raised on all of his music. Then I started working for my mom at the Woody Guthrie Publications office about 10 years ago. And I'm just learning more and more, and I'm loving more and more about who my grandfather really was by reading journals and putting out books and learning, researching in the Woody Guthrie archives.
Well, you mentioned Howard Beach, and I'd like to ask Nora about this because Woody Guthrie is the quintessential poet of the American heartland, yet he spent a considerable amount of his life in New York City, and not just in Manhattan, but Seagate and Coney Island, Howard Beach. And you've actually put out an entire book on Woody in New York City. Could you talk about how he got here and some of the places that he called home while he was here?
He came to New York in 1940. He hitchhiked across and arrived here on February 16th, 1940. And he came at the invite of Will Geer, who was an actor, a friend that he had met in Los Angeles. A lot of people know him as Grandpa Walton. And he was starring in a show in New York, and he liked Woody's music, and he said, "You ought to come to New York. They might like you here." And so that's what he did. He hitchhiked across, and he came to New York. And as a matter of fact, he stayed at a little boarding house on 43rd Street and 6th Avenue. That's where he hooked up. And the first 3 songs he wrote the first week he was in New York. He had traveled across the country, and he was looking out this window at the little hotel room, and he was remembering his journey. And he sat down and wrote "This Land Is Your Land" that first week in New York. And a lot of people don't know that he wrote "This Land." They assume that he wrote it out in the Midwest someplace, but it's really a New York song. It's about the result, the culmination of that journey, and how he puts it together. And the lyric, "In this boarding house," which I have to say right now, you know what stands on that corner? Trivia, New York Trivia Pursuit question, no. 43rd and 6th, southwest corner. Bank of America headquarters.
Whoa. Wow. Let's stay in 1940. Woody Guthrie appearing on a New York radio program featuring the folk singer Leadbelly.
Good afternoon. Your municipal station presents another in the series, Folk Songs of America, featuring that great Negro folk singer of Louisiana, Hughie Ledbetter, better known to you as Leadbelly. And Leadbelly has as his guest today the dustiest dust bowler of them all, Woody Guthrie of Oklahoma.
Well, I think now we're going to sing you one. Here's a song here that has to do with a book and a motion picture that come out here a while back by the name of The Grapes of Wrath, wrote down by a man, John Steinbeck, that throwed a pack on his back and went right out amongst the people to see just what is going on in the United States, and it just so happened that he hit a jackpot because he knew where he was going, he knew what he was writing about. So, I didn't read the book, but then I seen the picture 3 times, and I come home and I sat down and I wrote up a little piece about it. The name of this is The Ballad of Tom Joad. Tom Joad got out of that old McAllister pen. There he got his parole. After 4 long years on a man-killing charge, Tom Joad come a-walking down the road, poor boy. Tom Joad come a-walking down the road. It was there he found him a truck-driving man. There he got him a ride. Said, I just got a loose from the old penitentiary. Charge called homicide. Poor boy, it was a charge called homicide.
That clip of Woody Guthrie from 1940 comes courtesy of the Down Home radio show. Now, Tom Joad, in your book, My Name is New York, Ramblin' Around Woody Guthrie's Town, 57 East 4th Street, 6th floor, wrote this. Pete Seeger brought him over to write this song, describe the situation, and then the quote of John Steinbeck when he heard this remarkable song.
Well, Woody needed a typewriter to write this particular song, and Pete had a typewriter, and he was living on 4th Street in the East Village at the time, and he spent all night at the typewriter, and Pete was hanging around with him. Pete finally said, I got so tired. Woody had a jug of wine. Pete went to bed, and he woke up the next morning, and there was the 16-verse Ballad of Tom Joad in the typewriter, and Woody was asleep under the table. And it was a wonderful consolidation of Steinbeck's book, The Grapes of Wrath. And Woody was very, very moved by the character of Tom Joad and closely identified with him personally as a young man. He felt that he wished he could have said, that's where I'm going to be, Ma, which is really out of the book when Tom Joad ends and he says, wherever people are fighting for their rights, wherever people ain't free, that's where I'm going to be, Ma. And that became kind of Woody's mission in life as well. Of course, when John Steinbeck heard about the song, he cussed him out and said, God, that son of a bee, he put down in 17 verses what it took me 2 years to write.
The power of music. Well, let's talk about the musicians who worked with Woody. We interviewed Pete Seeger on Democracy Now! A couple of years ago, who talked about Alan Lomax and Woody Guthrie.
Alan got me started and many others. He's the man who told Woody Guthrie, says, Woody Guthrie, your mission in life is to write songs. Don't let anything distract you. You're like the people who wrote the ballads of Robin Hood and the Ballad of Jesse James. You keep writing ballads as long as you can. And Woody took it to heart. He wasn't a good husband. He was always running off. But he wrote songs, as you know.
Do you remember when you first met Woody Guthrie?
Oh, yeah. I'll never forget it. It was a benefit concert for California agricultural workers on Broadway at midnight. Burl Ives was there, the Golden Gate Quartet, Josh White, Leadbelly, Margot Mayo's square dance group with my wife dancing in it. I sang one song very amateurishly and retired in confusion to a smattering of polite applause. But Woody took over and for 20 minutes entranced everybody, not just with singing, but storytelling. I come from Oklahoma, you know. It's a rich state. You want some oil? Go down the ground. Get you some coal. Get you some oil. If you want lead, we got lead in Oklahoma. Go down in a hole and get you some lead. If you want coal, we got coal in Oklahoma. Go down the hole, get you some coal. If you want food, clothes, or groceries, just go in the hole and stay there. Then he'd sing a song.
That was Pete Seeger describing Woody Guthrie. Talk about when they tried out Nora at the Rainbow Room.
Well, he hooked up early on with Pete Seeger and a couple of other musicians. They were living and working together as the Almanac Singers. And historically, it's very important because it was the first communal group to form a folk music band, so to speak, that evolved into everything we know, from the Kingston Trio to Weavers, et cetera. Peter, Paul, and Mary all grew out of that little seed core idea. But they were kind of getting kind of popular in New York. Folk music was kind of new. It was a little bit of a buzz happening around town, and they got a chance to audition even at the Rainbow Room. And people loved them. Bess Hawes laughs and says every time we sang a song that put them down, the rich people loved it, because there's nothing more they love than having a sense of humor about themselves, unless then you get to the next step, you get serious, and then they stop laughing. Anyway, they did this audition at the Rainbow Room, and they were very popular, and the people said, oh, you guys are great, and they wanted to dress them up as hillbillies with little bonnets, and you wear a thing and sit on a pile of hay, and we'll do hillbilly music, and New York City elite will just love it. And Woody kind of freaked out and said, I'm not going to do this. And the rest of the almanacs were going, why not? This is a great paying gig. And Woody says, I'm not going to make fun of my people. And they said, but they're going to pay a lot of money. We're going to be a star in New York. He said, I'm not going to make fun of my people. And that's what they want us to do. They want us to be up here so that they can laugh at us instead of listen to us. And he started writing songs on the spot. He was a very good improviser, and he says, at the Rainbow Room, the soup's on the boil, they stir their salad with Standard Oil in New York City. And he totally blew the situation, and they escaped down the elevator 60-something floors.
My hero.
Yeah. Well, you know, people don't understand how hard it is to do things like that, especially when you need money, you're hungry. They were a very poor little group. And I think Woody kind of taught a lot of people, Steve, how to say no.
Yeah. Well, Steve, it's precisely about that, his ability, his importance in terms of merging politics and music. On his guitar, he had "This Machine Kills Fascists."
Several guitars, including some that didn't belong to him. It was,
it was written right over the guitar?
Well, yeah, it was actually, it's several, sometimes it was written on the surface of the guitar. There's several signs that he had made that were put on other guitars. You know, there's a whole thing of, like, I'm kind of a guitar collector, and I've spent a lot of time trying to track down the history of various guitars that Woody Guthrie was photographed with, because there's about 5 or 6 of them that he was photographed with, and some of them consistently. One guitar is one Gibson that belonged to him. I know one of them, there's a Martin that he's photographed over and over again, and he even has an artist model based on it, but it was not his guitar. It was Will Gehr's wife's guitar that he borrowed and kept for a very long time. So it's you know, the whole thing about a lot of it has to do with just who Woody was and how Woody was. I mean, I don't think, you know, he was a professional entertainer. He had a radio show that was extremely successful. Now, he had bosses that allowed certain, you know, him to get away with a certain amount because of their own political convictions, and there was a lot going on. He got a lot. His audiences at that point were, you know, it was the labor movement. So that sort of, he's becoming Woody Guthrie at that point. So by the time he arrives in New York City, he's Woody Guthrie, and he knows he is, and it's one of those things. I think you make decisions that, you know, you could make a different decision and make more money, but I think there's a point at which you realize, okay, I've got this audience, and I'm going to keep this audience, and I'm going to be able to look at myself in the mirror if there's certain lines that I draw for myself as I go along, and identify who I am as an artist that I don't cross. And that can change. It's not necessarily a static thing. Times change. What's important to you changes. But I think I think just, money isn't, he wasn't doing this for money. He wasn't, he was doing it because it happened. He became who he was as a performer as organically, I think, as anybody can, come up with a career plan. It sort of happened, and, a lot of it's who he was born, and most of it, I think, is as artists is who we become as whatever, the world, presents to us, and that we travel through, the paths that we travel.
Our next break, Steve, it's your choice.
I think the one, I don't think I have any doubt about that for this is like...
Woody Guthrie, New York Town. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez as we continue our special today, marking the 100th anniversary of the birth of one of the most important folk singers of our time. Celebrations are being held around the world. Born on July 4th, 1912, from California to the New York Island, including here in New York City, where Steve Earle, among many musicians, including Billy Bragg, is performing at Woody Fest at the City Winery. Woody Guthrie Folks Festival is also taking place in Woody's hometown of Okemah, Oklahoma. Our guests are Steve Earle, the three-time Grammy Award-winning musician, and Woody Guthrie's daughter, Nora Guthrie, president of both the Woody Guthrie Foundation Archives, and his granddaughter, Anna Canoni, who works at the archives as they preserve Woody Guthrie's memory. That song, New York Town, what does it mean to you, Nora? When did he write it?
Cab. Hey! Well, Woody wrote a ton of stuff. He wrote over 600 songs. He was in New York City from 1940 until he passed away, 1967. And a lot of people don't think of him as a New Yorker, but that was really his hometown for most of his life, actually. He was 27 when he came to New York. That's when he wrote This Land Is Your Land. Can you imagine? 27. Steve, what were you doing when you were 27?
And was that the name of it? Was that the name of the song? And what about the Forbidden Verses?
Originally it was titled God Bless America because originally it was a kind of quasi-parody of Irving Berlin's song God Bless America that was popular that year. Kate Smith had a hit song with it. And I never considered it anti-Berlin, and I refuse to consider it anti-Berlin. I know a lot of people have made a big thing of that, but I think it's an extension of God Bless America, because one is the voice of an immigrant who's coming from a really hard time in Russia, and he's really glad to be here. Yeah. And the other is when you're born here, and it's the next extension. It's chapter 2 of a song about America. So that's, anyway, nobody asked, but that's my thoughts about it. But so he wrote a ton of stuff here in New York City. That was one of the, he used to busk along the bars on 10th Avenue, 9th Avenue and 10th Avenue in the west side there. And
the docks were still there. Those were sailor bars down there.
Yeah, they were all sailors and guys who worked on ships, etc. The Cunard lines were coming in from Liverpool in those days also, that's another story, the connection of rock and roll and the Beatles and Lonnie Donegan, because that's how the Beatles heard about Woody. They used to go to Lonnie Donegan shows in Liverpool, and he was singing Woody and Leadbelly tunes.
Rock Island Line was his biggest hit, which was a Leadbelly tune.
Right, and he did Roll on Columbia.
Yeah, he did.
Big Grand Coulee Dam he did. And the little Beatles, they were all like 14, 15, 16. They were in the audience listening to Lonnie Donegan. So there's this incredible musical history lineage between Woody, the Upper West Side, and the docks, where he's singing songs like "Hey, Hey, Hey" for a nickel in a bar to get a drink, basically. So
Woody,
that's another story.
in the last 15 years of his life, got very sick.
Right.
Can you talk about his struggle with Huntington's disease?
And it's also a disease that claimed his mother's life as well.
Right. His mother was institutionalized when he was about 12 years old. She had an unknown disease, and she was falling apart, basically, and they figured it was all the troubles that the family was having with losing their money and depression. She was put in an insane asylum, actually. They didn't know what to do with her, and she passed away there. Woody never saw her again. And in the late 1940s, Woody suspected that something was wrong with him as well. And his behavior started changing. He was having trouble walking, things like that. And at the time, nobody really knew what it was. His friends thought he was drinking a lot. And they kind of started staying clear of him because they thought he was a bad influence. And a lot of the anecdotal history that you still hear around town is what a drunk he was a womanizer, da-da-da-da-da-da. But all this is really related to Huntington's disease, including hypersexual behavior, things like that. Now they know. Anyway, long story short, he was finally diagnosed around 1952. All they could do was diagnose you. They said, well, you have Huntington's, but we don't have any clue what to do about it.
It makes you lose control.
It's a neurological disease, and it affects body, mind, everything. Like I just said, emotionally, psychologically, he started changing. He really started falling apart, actually, and caused a lot of problems in the family, obviously. Nobody knew. He was just crazy. Anyway, so he was diagnosed and
institutionalized.
He put himself in a hospital after he wandered around the country. He tried to hold on to whatever life he had. He was kind of running away from it, probably. Hitchhiking around the country, dropping in on old friends in Oklahoma and California, and finally he got a grip on himself and realized he would be hospitalized. And he did live for 15 years in different New York City hospitals.
Like Greystone out of New Jersey.
Yeah, and ironically, it was also a psychiatric ward. Greystone was the largest psychiatric ward in the East Coast. It had like hundreds of thousands of people or something in it.
Just outside Morristown.
Yeah, and he was just like his mom. They didn't know what to do with him, and he was put in a psychiatric ward with 50 other patients. One of the symptoms of Huntington's, like you lose control of your arms, etc. And in these institutions, they would walk around and drop a plate of food in front of your bed. It was like kind of one flew over the cuckoo's nest here. And he couldn't get the fork to his mouth. My mother had to pay other patients to feed him.
Your mother was?
Marjorie Guthrie, who a lot of people in your audience might know her from the Martha Graham Company. She was quite well known in the dance world in New York City in those years. She was Merce Cunningham's teacher. She was Eric Hawkins' teacher. Anyway, our house was Leadbelly to the left and Martha Graham to the right, and other people in front and back.
Where was, wait, John Gotti, too?
John Gotti lived right over there.
He was your next-door neighbor?
Oh, I was in Howard Beach.
In Howard Beach,
Absolutely.
right.
And who was your Hebrew teacher?
Yeah, my grandmother was a Yiddish poetess. This is another story, Amy, but she was like a well-known Yiddish poetess, and she had written her story of her life in Hebrew, and my mother wanted us to be able to read her story. So she thought, and by the way, we're not religious. On my birth certificate under religion, it says all or none. Anyway, but one of the cultural aspects was that we should learn Hebrew to read my grandmother's stuff. And so my mom hired a local rabbi who was in the synagogue a couple of blocks away. He's a young guy in his 20s or something, seemed kind of sweet and quiet, actually. And she hired him for a couple of months to teach us Hebrew. I actually have home footage of him in the house. We're sitting around the table like this. Anyway, it was a disaster, and we were not very good, and he got really upset and said to my mother, the Guthrie kids are not taking Hebrew seriously. He was right.
And he was.
And he left. He quit. And evidently, he quit America as well and ended up in Israel, and his name was Meir Kahane.
Meir Kahane ended up being assassinated in Times Square.
Yes.
Yes. But he was a tough guy.
So John Gotti,
he was like
Rabbi
passive-aggressive.
Then you went on to live in Chappaqua. Your neighbors are the Clintons.
Yeah, I moved up to Westchester like really 20-something years ago after living around all the boroughs. Went to Elizabeth Irwin High School, where a lot of your friends from last night went, Johnny Hammond, and a lot of...
There was a big Elizabeth Irwin reunion last night. There was at the
Well, it's right across the street from City Winery.
I played, friends of mine that have a child at EI now asked me to do, the kids put together a coffee house as a fundraiser at EI, and I played in that little auditorium at EI, and it was pretty, I knew you by that time, so by the time I did that, and I just thought about the people that I knew that had gone to school, and that stage, like Leadbelly was definitely on that stage. I know that for a fact. There. Yeah, and I wondered whether Woody actually played there or not.
My father played in Elizabeth Irwin in 1949, but it's a historically very important school, actually, because it was a lot of blacklisted teachers worked there, people who couldn't get work anyplace else in the 50s. And so, like, my music teacher was Victor Fink, who's Janice Ian's father. People that went to the school, Angela Davis went there, the Rosenberg's kids were there. Arthur Miller's kids were there, Norman Mailer's kids were there, Woody Guthrie's kids were there. So it was a very interesting school to go to. But anyway, I did move up to Westchester.
I wanted to ask you about the impact on the family of your father's battle with Huntington's. Eventually, your mother began an effort to eradicate Huntington's.
Right. When my dad died, they held a concert at Carnegie Hall, and actually that was the concert that Dylan came out of retirement. He had been in the motorcycle accident and came out of retirement and says, I got to do this. And that was wonderful. The band was there, and Dylan, and a whole bunch of other people. My brother was just starting out. He must have been like 20 or something at the time. But at that point, my mother was she was an incredible woman. She really deserves a network television show just to talk about her or something. I don't know. But she kind of put her foot down and gathered us all around the table. I was 21. And the day after I turned 21, she said to us, are you all okay? You're 21 now. Can you take care of yourselves? Are you okay? And we all went, yeah, Mom, what's up? And she said, I have to go find a cure for Huntington's disease. And we went, oh, okay, it's okay with us. And that's what she put an ad in the New York Times the next day and said, if anyone knows anything about Huntington's disease, call Virginia 80249. And one person called, and they met for tea. They put the ad in again. 3 people called. They met for tea. Long story short, she founded all the organizations that began Huntington's disease research, which is now at the forefront. All the doctors and researchers at the forefront of genetic research right now were my mother's babies. She, not literally, but she would go around to all the medical schools and talk to the students and say, why go into plastic surgery when you can go into genetic research? Again, why do you have to make money when you can do something for humanity? So she is really the godmother of so much of the research that's happening now. Is one funny story, since Anna's here. When I was pregnant with Anna.
We have 20 seconds.
Tell her quickly. I said, Mom, I'm going to have a baby. She said, I have to go to Australia to find out about Huntington's disease. I said, but I'm going to have a baby. She goes, it'll be fine, don't worry, you know. So she wasn't there for, I said, everyone's there for the birth of their first grandchild. She had to go to Australia to make a speech that night. But there was that kind of life, you know, where you really, as children and everything, you kind of learn to give it up for humanity.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you both very much for being with us. We're going to continue our post-show just after this break, and you can go to democracynow.org. Thank you to Steve Earle and to Anna Canoni and to Nora Guthrie, president of both the Woody Guthrie Foundation and Archive. If you want to get a copy of today's show as well as July 4th show, marking this 100th anniversary of the birth of one of the country's greatest songwriters, Woody Guthrie, born on July 14th, 1912, you can go to Democracy Now!